So today we're beginning a series called Unbecoming. Becoming ourselves, becoming one, becoming a few other things. Becoming broken open. I can't remember the last one at the moment. But I'd like, today we start with unbecoming ourselves. And I'd like to read from Wayne Dyer's book, Your Sacred Self. You have been facing the wrong way. The most important insight you can have is to realize that you've been facing the wrong way for the better part of your life. Take a moment right now to experience what I mean. Picture yourself in any position you like, standing, sitting, lying down, whatever is easiest for you to imagine. Now look at that mental picture of yourself. What you see in this exercise is a you who is always looking away from yourself, always looking outside of yourself. You are facing the wrong way. Now imagine being able to shift around and face the opposite direction. If you could, in some magical way, do so, then you would be facing inward. This is not some form of mental gymnastics in which you simply imagine yourself turning around and facing inward. I'm suggesting a way of knowing your spiritual identity. I am suggesting you meet the challenge and take the path of your spiritual quest.
Our scripture reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Thomas, the only complete copy of which was found among the Nag Hammadi texts discovered in 1945. It is a sayings gospel. It does not have an overall story of Jesus, but simply offers 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. The 70th saying is this: Jesus said, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you."
Thank you, Sharon. Would you pray with me? Holy One, help us to look the right direction as we continue on our spiritual path. It's easy to look for you outside. It's easy to focus on what's going on outside of ourselves. It's easy to pass judgment on others. It's much more difficult to look within, to be aware of what's going on within, to bring forth what is within, which is our divine self, connected to you. Help us. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. The quote at the beginning of Wayne Dyer's book says, "All my life I wanted to be somebody. Now I finally am somebody, but it isn't me." Do you ever feel that way? I think there's a lot of truth to that. We spend a lot of the first part of our lives trying to be somebody, trying to accomplish something, trying to please people or do it, quote unquote, right, so that we'll make other people happy, so that we'll be successful in the eyes of society, so that we'll get good grades, and then we'll get into a good college, and then we'll get a good job. My daughter's done all that. We talked about that just a few minutes ago. And then we do all of that so that we'll be included, and we'll be liked, and we'll have friends, and we'll find somebody to love. I've heard probably, too many times, someone talking about, those first couple dates with someone else where you don't want to say you don't like anything that they like because you want to make a connection. You don't want to make them think that you don't have any common ground and that you shouldn't be together. And so you start to make things up about, oh yeah, sure, I like Terminator movies. I like chick flicks. clicks, maybe, if it's not your thing. You make up stuff and you go along with things. That's not your true self, just so someone else will like you. And then we kind of get to midlife. Or maybe some people get there earlier, maybe some people get there later, and I assure you there are some people who don't ever get there at all. But we get to that place where we look inside and we say, is this what I've created? Is this me? Is this true to who I am? Is this all that life is really about, or have I missed something along the way? It feels like we reach a point in maturity where we sense that there's something more. And Wayne Dyer would probably say, well, you've been looking the wrong direction for a long time, and now you're starting to look in the right direction. Trying to figure out who our true self is and how to be that in the world. And there's not a lot of really good direction on that. Aside from maybe a good section of self-help books in Barnes & Noble. But spiritually, biblically, there's not a lot of good direction. That's been one of my gripes with the books they chose once upon a time to put in our Bible. It's a lot about looking out there for God, looking out there for the answers, and very little direction to lead us inward, to a connection to the divine inward. Very little direction about seeking ourselves and the person that we were created to be. And so that's one of the reasons that I used the Gospel of Thomas this morning, because a lot of those Gnostic texts, those ones that were buried for so long and then hidden for longer than that, they do have a mystical bent to them. They do have a spiritual side that calls us to look within. And this saying from Thomas is one of my absolute favorite. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And I don't think that means we're going to blow up tomorrow or anything. But it means that when we don't bring forth our true self, it hurts us. When we bring forth our true selves, it's like being set free, being filled, being whole, being joyful. But when we bury those things that are truly us, when we feel like we have to, or we're expected to, or we just don't know how to do it any other way, eventually it eats away at us. And it hurts the very core of our being. So, the question becomes, I guess first of all, what does our true self look like? How do we know when that's what we found? And I think some of that is general. I think some ways of describing our true selves apply to everybody. And some ways are very specific. So what do you think? What does your true self look like? Or our true selves look like?
Content.
Content. Not complacent, but content. What else? What was it? Quirky. Shirley's true self is quirky. We may all be quirky. We could all just be burying that. It's possible we should all be wearing 2 different shoes every day. What else? See, this is why it's hard. Apparently we can't even name it.
Lighthearted.
Lighthearted. Okay? Your true self. What do our true selves look like?
Sometimes it's a little bit darker than I want to share.
Okay. I would suggest that that's your ego and not your true self. Chris says sometimes it's darker than what I want to share. So let's hold that thought, okay? I would suggest that our true self is radiant. That it's beautiful. It's the core of our very being. It's as yummy as that Tootsie Roll center in the Tootsie Pop. It's pure and it's good. It's connected to the divine. And it is unique at the same time. I think we all have different passions and different talents. And sometimes we live true to those and sometimes we don't. You know, me trying to be an engineer was not being true to my gifts and my talents. Is that making sense? Okay. So, it's not always easy to just be true to ourselves. It's not like flipping on and off a light switch. Albert Schweitzer once said that the path of awakening is not about becoming who we are. It's about unbecoming who we are not. It's about unbecoming who we are not. Which again requires us to identify who we are, partially, so we can unbecome who we are not. But I think if we begin with that base of our true selves are something that's loving and compassionate and kind and generous and content, then when we're being cynical and angry and negative and bitter, we're not in touch with our true selves. You know, we've all known older people who get to a point where they just say whatever they want, whenever they want, right? And part of us goes, gosh, I can't wait till I get to that point. But then I start to think about it, and the reality is that they're just allowing their ego selves to go off. So we spend the spiritual path is about trying to come home to ourselves, ourself, if you want, with a capital S, our true self. It's our spiritual path. But we spend the first part of our lives individuating and differentiating and on a path of discovery of our ego selves with a little s. And then it's trying to find, once again, the spiritual path is back to the self with a big S. And when we get caught up like those older people who just say whatever they want, it's like they regressed back to childhood and went, well, I'm old enough, I can just say whatever the heck I want and it doesn't matter if it hurts anybody or not. It feels to me like they've just kind of completely forgotten who their true selves are and have decided it doesn't matter. It sounds kind of nice because we all kind of like to just mouth off like that occasionally, but really does it get us anywhere but getting people hurt? I don't think so. So, the path of unbecoming who we are not, so that we can unbecome those things our egos have said we're supposed to be and become more of ourselves with a capital S. That's what I was trying to say. Those dark pieces, Chris, to me, those are that little ego self that have been afraid and have held us in a place that isn't true to the beauty of our souls. So what do you need to unbecome to? If you think about it, or maybe if you don't want to talk about yourselves, you can talk about somebody else, because we know everybody else much better than we know ourselves. We're certain we know what everybody else should do before we know what we should do. What do we need to unbecome to find our true selves?
Let go of ego.
Okay, more specific than let go of your ego. Chris?
Well, when I graduated high school, I stopped doing music because I thought that I had to go and make money. You know, I had worked in a factory, and I thought that was what I had to do. I unbecame myself. You know, I stopped playing the trumpet for 8 years, and I went through a lot. And it took me a while to find myself again, at least in terms of that part of it. Because I thought that I didn't think I could make money doing music, and I thought I had to make money, and I was 18 years old. That was that.
Right, so for those of you on Zoom, Chris pretty much said that coming out of high school, he felt like the goal was to make money. And so instead of following his gift and his passion for music, he went another direction and did play for, what did you say, 8 years?
8 years.
So you had to give up society's what they're putting on you, society puts on you, that expectation, there's the word I want. Have to give up some of those expectations in order to live true to yourself, or your perception of what was
My ego
expected.
telling me that this is what society
Right.
thinks I should do.
What else? What else do we need to let go of? What do we need to unbecome? Judgment. Yeah, that's a big one.
Unforgiving.
Unforgiving. To be unforgiving. And the flip side of that, to not be willing to ask for forgiveness. To learn how to say, I'm sorry, and will you forgive me? What else do we need to unbecome? Impatient. Another tough one. You and Sandy are in the hot seats this morning. Judging and impatient. There we go. All wrapped up right there. What else? Anger. Anger that we won't let go of. To let go of pleasing others. Let go of the need to be in control. Some of us need to let go of enabling. A fear of being vulnerable. I'm going to check my list. You got some of them. How about a need to be right? Guilt, shame, all kinds of things we need to unbecome. That person who's caught in those cycles, those traps, those tapes, that baggage. I've been reading a book by Carolyn Miss called Entering the Castle for a women's group. And she tells a story about a woman who's a screamer. She just screams to get whatever she wants. It's her way of controlling others, of controlling her family, of making sure everybody does what she wants them to do. And so her children and her husband have gotten to the point where they just try and head it all off at the pass. We'll just do everything you want us to do because we don't like it when you scream. So Carolyn sat down with her, and this woman found it impossible to think of any other way to deal with situations other than to scream. Carolyn said, can you come up with an alternate option? And the woman went blank. She couldn't picture any other way other than screaming. She felt like she would be voiceless if she didn't scream, and she wasn't about to give it up. And what a sad place to be stuck. When she's clearly afraid of not getting her way, clearly stuck in a place where she's lost herself, and the knowledge that there is a beautiful, loving person inside her that can relate to others in a completely different way and be fulfilled and be whole. And so not only is she keeping herself in a place of not becoming herself, but she's created an environment that's completely unhealthy so that her kids and her husband aren't safe to be themselves. It was a number of years ago where a clown actually tweeted a story that's been turned into an article, but she tweeted about doing some face painting on some kids at a picnic. And a little 4-year-old boy came and sat down in the chair next to her and asked her if she would paint a blue butterfly on his face. And the mother heard and turned and looked and said, no, he doesn't want a blue butterfly. And the clown looked at her and said, well, what do you mean? Butterflies are beautiful. Shouldn't I paint what he wants? No, I'm his mother. Paint something a boy would have on his face. And then the mother looked at the father and said, you don't want your boy walking around with a butterfly on his face, do you? And the father said, no. So here's this poor little 4-year-old boy whose parents would both be ashamed if he were true to himself and put a blue butterfly on his face. And despite the clown's best attempts, eventually she had to do what the mother wanted, And the mother was so afraid of this blue butterfly that she had the clown paint a skull and crossbones on the little boy's cheek. And when she was done, she looked at the little boy and said, "Would you like me to paint a blue butterfly too?" And the little boy nodded, but the mother interrupted and said, "You didn't ask me." And the clown said, "Well, I'm sorry, but I thought this was about him." And she said, "Well, I'm his mother, and you need to ask me." So when this little boy grows up someday, if he wants to discover his true self, he's going to have to unbecome that shamed child to release the beautiful self within him that wanted to embrace a blue butterfly. One more story. Actually, Bill Gribble was sharing this with me. He graduated from St. Olaf's College, and they were getting ready for a reunion, and everybody was asked to submit a little bio about themselves, a little article about themselves. And one of his friends, by the name of Mike, submitted an article entitled "Queer Olaf." And he talked in this bio/article about what it was like to pretend to be straight for all of those years of college. He was unbecoming straight to his class in that article. And in his openness and his vulnerability, it encouraged 19 other men to come forward and talk about their experiences and what it had been like to try and hide being gay when they were in college. And they talked about trying to walk the right way so people didn't think you were gay, and trying to hold your books the right way so people didn't think you were gay, and comb your hair the way straight guys comb their hair. And they talked about the grief that they felt because of all of the years that they had kept that part of themselves hidden. Because none of them had come out until they were in their 60s. The things we have to unbecome are vast. And it takes self-reflection, and it takes self-awareness, and it takes diligence to pay attention to when that beautiful self wants to come out and is being squashed by our judgmentalism, or our impatience, or our anger, or our guilt, or our expectations of others, or our perceived expectations of what we have to do to please others. The list goes on and on, but the spiritual path, the fulfilling, healing spiritual path, is to be true to the radiant self that is in each of us. Let me just close with a poem by Mark Nepo. The center I once glimpsed is all around me, a landscape I now live in. And I will not pretend anymore. If those I love can't recognize me with my soul out in the open, I will no longer retreat and show what is familiar. And he says, you do not have to do anything to be loved. And being who you are does not let others down. This needs to be repeated and often. Simply be who you are and love what is before you. So I invite us all to the sacred quest of unbecoming who we are not and becoming who we are, so that we can live more whole, more free, more radiant, more beautiful lives. Amen.